Welcome to IVF This, episode 192, IVF and the Last Embryo. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing so well today. I'm really excited about the podcast episode I've got for you today. I think it's a very relevant topic. I've had a couple of clients recently either find out that they only have one embryo or are moving into their final embryo transfer cycle. And so I think this is very topical, and I can't remember ever talking about it explicitly yet. So 191 episodes later, here we are, which is still incredible that we're 192 episodes in. Wow, yeah, we're getting close to breaking that 200 mark, which seems insane. But here we are. This episode drops right before Christmas. So Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. I think there's something like, I don't know, there's a really high number of cultural holidays that fall within the time span in the US from Thanksgiving to Christmas. So whatever you celebrate or don't celebrate, or how you choose to spend this time, I just hope it is everything you want and more. I know that the holidays are a particularly challenging time in the world of infertility and IVF. So I just want you guys to know I'm here. I'm holding all of you, and you are allowed to have fun and experience joy, even right now, even if you don't have the family that you have prayed for, have wanted for, thought about, and dreamt of. All right. We're going to be talking about something that I don't know, unless you've been there, unless you have been confronted with the last embryo. It carries a very particular kind of weight. Something that feels different in the body, something that feels different in the way you think about it, feels different in your chest. It feels different in the way that you breathe, in your breath. And that is the last embryo. And when I say last, I want to be really clear. I don't mean the last embryo you'll ever have, right? It could be. It can also mean that it's the last embryo of this cycle, the last embryo after others didn't work, the last embryo you're transferring before maybe you're not sure what comes next, right? The last embryo can be a lot of different things to different people. So I want to make sure that that is clear from the jump. Now, the moment when this option narrows, when the margin for error, the margin for success feels very thin, when the transfer starts to feel like it's carrying the weight of everything. If that is where you are right now, or where you have been, I want you to know you are not imagining how heavy this feels. This moment is different. There is something uniquely heavy about the words, the last embryo. Not because you're dramatic, not because you're too attached, not because you're doing IVF wrong or you're not positive enough or anything, but because last changes how your nervous system responds. When there were multiple embryos, or maybe it was your very first transfer, your brain had some wiggle room, right? It had possibility to like cling to, a sense, real or imagined, that there was more coming. But when something feels finite, which is what and how the last embryo feels, your brain has to shift gears. It's normal for it to shift gears. This, I remember confronting this, and it didn't feel like it was just a medical procedure, like the stim cycle had felt, or my previous transfer had felt. It became a meaning making moment. And meaning is really heavy, or can be really heavy. So let's talk a little bit about why the brain makes the last embryo carry so much. When you approach the last embryo, a few things tend to happen internally. First, scarcity kicks in. The brain is wired to respond differently when something feels limited or endangered. Scarcity activates survival mode, and survival brains, they don't do nuance. There's none, zero. There's no gray area. It's all black or white. The second thing that happens to our brain is that meaning accumulates. This is when the embryo doesn't just represent itself any longer. It starts to carry the weight of every injection, every phone call, every loss, every version of the future you had imagined. Without meaning to, on accident, right? We stack years of grief and anticipation and expectation onto something impossibly small. And the third way that this happens is responsibility creeps in. And what I mean by that is that that is where the pressure shows up. That is the this has to work mentality. The I can't mess this up. The belief that how we feel might somehow determine the outcome. And I'm going to share a little bit about my personal story here because I've lived it from more than one angle. So my last embryo was in August of 2020. I've talked about it a few times, never within this context, but I've talked about this particular transfer. My husband and I did what we believed to be the last embryo transfer ever. The first time we went through IVF was in 2017 and 2016. And we got 2 embryos. The first transfer was successful, and that is now my middle little. And so this is the second transfer, the second embryo that came from that first stem cycle, which we had assumed at that time would be our only stem cycle. Our first transfer had worked. That embryo, like I said, was now my middle little. So I walked into that transfer in August of 2020 when the world was already like in the upside down. I walked into that transfer with a hell of a lot of confidence. Honestly, probably too much confidence. There was a lot of hubris that Emily was walking around with in that, like as approaching the transfer cycle and even during the transfer, like during the 2-week wait. I didn't do a lot of the things that I talk about with my clients. I didn't cope ahead. I didn't failure plan. I didn't emotionally prepare myself for another potential outcome, right? Which is the exact opposite of what I teach. Yes, I know, the irony abounds. And it wasn't like I was avoiding it. It was more like, again, just ego, just hubris, just an unfathomable amount of confidence and arrogance. It was this quiet belief of like, well, why wouldn't this work? And the universe laughs and laughs. So when the transfer failed, I was completely heartbroken. Not just disappointed, not just sad. I mean, shattered. Because I hadn't just lost that one last embryo, I lost the future that I thought was already decided. The family that we believed we could have, 3 kids, which is what I had dreamed and envisioned. No question marks, no room for doubt or error. That's what I grieved. And that loss sent me spiraling into probably one of the hardest seasons of my life and one of the hardest seasons of my marriage. I was grieving deeply, deeply, and in a way that my husband didn't necessarily really understand because he was like, "Hey, we got 2 kids. What are you talking about?" Right? And so there was a little bit of incompatibility in terms of what we were grieving and how we were grieving. He was upset, don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't to the same level because it was my vision, it was my dream, it was my thought that we would have those 3 kids, right? And so deeply grieving this loss, and not just the embryo, but the possibility that this might be it, right? That the picture in my head of 3 little babies might never come to be. And I've talked about this so many times. Grief changes people. It changes how we react and respond to things. It changes how we communicate. It changes how we relate. It changes how safe we feel. And my husband and I struggled. We talked and we argued and we went to marriage counseling. We sat with questions that we had never had to answer before. And slowly, over many months, we grieved together. Not rushed grief, not tidy grief by any stretch of the imagination, real grief. Ugly, messy, tumultuous, sometimes grounded, sometimes peaceful, right? That's the real grief. And so then we get to our last embryo. Eventually, we had decided, after a lot of conversations and a lot of honesty, we were going to give it one more try, one more stem cycle. So we did that. We did one more stem cycle and we got 3 embryos. And then after genetic testing, it dropped down to 1. 1 embryo, the last embryo. And here's what surprised me. I walked into that transfer cycle and into that transfer completely differently. Not confident in the way I had been before, not armored, not performatively hopeful or positive, but calm and grounded and clear. I had already faced the grief that I was afraid of, the grief that had kept me up at night. I had already sat with the possibility of loss. I had reckoned with the fact that I would survive and even thrive if my heart was broken again. And I had dedicated months of my self-coaching, therapy, marriage counseling, all of those things to loving the life I had at that moment before we pursued another baby, so that I wasn't left grappling with what had happened the last time, the first last. And that calm that I was feeling wasn't certainty. I still didn't know if it was going to work. I mean, I hoped it was going to work, but I had no clue, right? I couldn't see into the future. So it wasn't certainty that gave me that calm. It was integration. And this is something I think is a little bit of the nuance that's missed with the last embryo. Or I could probably say this with any failed transfer, any failed embryo transfer. Meaning is not the same as outcome. And what I mean by that is this: the process does not have to end in a positive pregnancy test or a baby at the end of it to be meaningful. And I want to say that slowly. Something can matter deeply without it working out the way that you had hoped. IVF quietly and sometimes loudly and forcibly teaches us that meaning equals success. And I think in a lot of ways, life does too. Teaches us that meaning equals success, that effort earns outcome. And that if you do just enough, endure enough, believe enough, you will be rewarded. But that's not actually how meaning works. Meaning can come from the courage it took to try it again. The honesty you have to have with yourself and your partner. The grief that you allowed and even confronted without or instead of suppressing it. The boundaries that you honored for yourself, like by yourself, like boundaries that you hold for yourself and boundaries that you hold for other people. And the way that you can show up even when you're absolutely terrified. None of that meaning requires a positive pregnancy test. And I don't say that because I think like I want you to find meaning in other places. I don't want you to think that this is about giving up hope. It's not. It's about refusing to make meaningful and meaning conditional. Because when meaning is only allowed if the outcome is perfect, that is when the cost becomes unbearable. It doesn't have to be perfect for it to matter. And this is true for embryos. It's true for transfers. It's true for me. It's true for you. The process does not have to be neat, successful, or storybook to count. You don't have to get a baby for this season to have shaped you, for it to have changed you, for it to have mattered. That doesn't make the losses smaller. It just means that they're not empty. And it is possible to let these moments be important because they are, without letting them mean everything. There's middle space there where you don't bypass the weight or the heaviness of this, but you also don't collapse under the weight of it. Maybe you tell yourself, this matters deeply to me, and I don't have to make it mean everything. I can hope without asking this moment to define my worth. No matter what happens, I will need support, and I'm allowed to ask for it. This isn't detachment, which I am going to do an episode in a couple of episodes on the art of detachment, because I think there's a lot of great things that we can learn from the art of detachment. It's about containment. So if you're standing on this precipice of the last embryo, whether it's the last of this cycle or the last you could ever imagine yourself doing, I want you to know this. You are not weak for how heavy this feels. You are not doing this wrong by any stretch of the imagination. You are not alone in this moment, even if it feels unbearably lonely. Whatever happens, no matter what happens, this moment matters. Not because of what it produces, can produce, might produce, but because of how deeply and honestly you have lived it. This season, this honoring of the last embryo deserves the tenderness that you are giving to it. And I'm holding you right here. I'm holding the line with you. And I want you to know you matter too. The embryo and the potential for the life and the baby and the family that it represents is not everything. You are everything. And this is something that matters deeply to you, but it does not get to define you, positive or negative, although I secretly hope it's always positive for you. So I'm glad you're here with me. I hope this podcast episode was helpful for you. Hopefully, the idea is just to take a little bit of the heaviness out of the last embryo. We're not going to get to, no matter what happens, I'll be just fine. No, let's honor the heaviness. Let's honor the emotional upheaval that you're facing. But also remember that if an emotion is the worst thing that you can imagine, you have already been fighting those. You have already been shaped by them. You have survived them. You have thrived through them. And you can do it again. Okay? All right. That is what I have for you. Remember, it doesn't have to end in a positive to be meaningful. We can find meaning in everything. Okay? Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Happy holidays. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.